welcome to our panel discussion, India-Russia relations, oil, arms, and a difficult balance. My name is Ivan Lidarev. I'm a visiting research fellow here at the Institute of South Asian Studies, and I'm very glad to welcome all of you to our panel discussion. Today, as the title suggests, we will be discussing the complex and a little bit contradictory India-Russia relationship. So on one hand, this relationship is very warm. It has a lot of strategic and historical depth. Going back to the Cold War, the two sides had a very close relationship, a very close partnership. Obviously, they have a strong defense relationship. They have, at least until very recently, a very strong energy relationship. Also, their geostrategic visions are in some ways aligned, at least in some ways. They both seek to constrain China in broader Eurasia. Both sides are also partners in clubs like SCO, BRICS. Very importantly, also, the two sides share a vision of multipolarity on the international stage and even multipolarity in Asia. However, this is the positive side. On the negative side of the relationship, there are strong factors which pull the two sides apart from each other. For example, during the last 20 or so years, India has moved closer to the US, while China and Russia have built an increasingly closer partnership that some people even describe as an alliance. India is a member of the Quad, which Russia sees as a potential challenge now and a potential threat in the future. There is also relatively limited economic complementarity between the two sides. Technology transfer is relatively limited apart from defense as a field. So there are substantial constraints on their relationship. So how are the two sides going to navigate this difficult balance? Are they going to be able to establish a strong economic foundation for their relationship, as President Putin suggested during his recent visit to India in December last year? Would the two sides be able to stop the decline of their defense relationship, which clearly has been declining for the last decade or so? Would they be able to translate their shared vision of multipolarity into a real agenda about the future of the world order? So to deal with these very complex and very contradictory questions and kind of understand the difficult balance between Delhi and Moscow, we have two very eminent panelists, Professor Goshan Sachdeva and Dr. Alexei Zakharov. I want to kind of express a very warm welcome to both of you. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. So let me first introduce the two panelists. Professor Goshan Sachdeva is professor and Jean Monnet chair at the Center for European Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. He's also the book series editor for Europe-Asia Connectivity and co-editor of Asia-Europe Journal. He works on Europe and Eurasia connectivity, development cooperation, energy security, and Indian foreign policy. He's also the chairperson of the Center for European Studies and director of Energy Studies program. Also, very importantly, he has a very substantial Russia-related experience. He used to be visiting fellow at the Institute of Oriental Studies, Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow. He's participant in a lot of different formats and dialogues related to the Valdai Discussion Club, and very recently, as part of an ICWA delegation, he went to Moscow. So we are very honored to have Professor Sachdeva with us. And also, I would like to very much to welcome Dr. Alexei Zakharov. Dr. Zakharov is fellow with the Strategic Studies program at the Observer Research Foundation. He has been postdoctoral fellow at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, a research fellow at the Institute of Oriental Studies at the Russian Academy of Sciences, and he has held a number of fellowships, visiting fellowships, including at Gateway House, at IDSA, now called MP-IDSA, the French Institute of Geopolitics at the University of Paris 8. He got his PhD in history from Saratov State University. So, gentlemen, once again, welcome to both of you. First, I'll ask Professor Sachdeva to speak for about 15 minutes. Then I'll turn to Dr. Zakharov, and then we'll open the floor to questions. To those of you who have questions, I'll ask you to type them in the question and answer box, and then I'll go through them and I'll ask them to our two panelists. So, Professor Sachdeva, please, to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for this invitation and this opportunity to speak on India Russia. You're right. I mean, there are a lot of discussions about India Russia. And interestingly, within India, everybody knew about very special relationship which India has, with Russia. So they are not, many people are not really surprised when, we talk about India, Russia and very close cooperation in many areas. But in the last 3, 4 years, I think the whole world has somehow realized the strength and also the close cooperation between India and Russia and the kind of trust which Indian policymakers and the Russian policymakers they share in this kind of world where now trust is something very very crucial. So obviously the relationship it's rooted in the strong legacy of Indo-Soviet economic and political ties. But as I said, the contemporary relations are now built on again on the mutual trust and the kind of confidence. Despite all the major shifts in global geopolitics and changes in domestic and foreign policies of both the countries, I think their relationship has remained very steady and resilient. In fact, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, last year or 2 years back, in the context of some of these discussions on India-Russia, when he was asked about India-Russia, he said the whole world has kind of, I mean, the India-Russia relationship receives global attentions, not because it has changed amidst all the changes which are taking place, but because it has not changed. So that's what exactly sometimes puzzle many people. Um, I mean, particularly if you look at today, India has more than 40 strategic partnerships, with all major countries in the West, from the US to EU to, Germany, France, UK, Japan, Australia, many, many others. And so India, of course, in the last 20 years have become very close partners of the United States, and also, of course, there are certain issues now, but by and large, I mean, they identify, and also with the European Union, with the European partners. But Russia still continue to occupy a very special place in India's foreign policy, and that is, it's not something which has happened recently. You know, governments have come and gone, political parties have changed, but I think that particular factor in Indian foreign policies continues. Now, as you rightly mentioned, that Russia has been a key defense partner for decades. And India is, of course, diversifying. It's buying from United States now. The major possibilities of further purchase of Rafale, more than 100 from France, and also Prime Minister is visiting today Israel. So we are also buying from Israel. But Russia continue to play a very important role in India's defense industry, not just only as a supplier. Yes, numbers might have gone down because diversification has taken place. It used to be 70%, it may be 35, 40% today, but those percentage can just change. If there are one or two major orders, I mean, there are reports that India, even after buying, even after, seriously kind of considering buying from France more than 100 jets, India might be buying 35, 40 jets from Sukhoi 57 from Russia as well. I mean, all these and of course S-500 and others. So it means, these numbers percentage may go up and down, but the fact of the matter is that India will continue to buy this. Russia will continue to be a very important factor because as a result of this, Indian domestic defense industry has become strong, and India has also become significant exporter of some of those products, which India is, BrahMos missiles and other, which India and Russia they have been producing together. Yeah. So those factors, I think everybody knew. But one factor which actually worried, policymakers from both countries, during the Indo-Soviet period, we had, of course, very close strategic and political ties with the Soviet Union. But, there was also very other important factor was that Soviet Union was also India's major trading partner. When Soviet Union broke up in 1991, I think 16-17% of Indian exports were going to Soviet Union. So that was a major market. So what happened after this that, both the countries were able to restore political, strategic and other thing, but the commercial pillar was always very, very weak. For the last, it was recognized. Of course, we have very consistent. In India, Russia, signed the strategic partnership in 2000. Since then, you can see that the summit meetings have been taking place very, very regularly, and every time they identified that they need to strengthen this commercial component, but somehow for last many, many years, our trade was kind of stuck about 10 billion a year. Now, what has happened is, as a result of the Ukraine crisis or Ukraine war and Western sanctions and the Europeans' decision to move away from Russian energy, suddenly now you have something new which was not expected few years back. So till very recently, Russia was India's major oil supplier. So up to 40% of India's crude oil was coming from Russia, more than 2 million barrels per day. And as a result of this, last year the trade was about 70 billion. So Russia became fourth largest trading partner of India. So once the trade volumes went up, all kind of discussions which were taking place for many years about international north-south trade corridor and other kind of Chennai-Vladivostok corridor. Now, in principle, there was no problem in this, but only I think those corridors didn't really take off because there was no trade volumes. So now suddenly you also have trade volumes. So all those discussions again in the last 2 years have been revived again. That many now things can happen. Now, interesting thing is that this trade has gone up uh, in a situation where Russia is under sanctions. Russia is cut off from SWIFT. So how it's not just only buying certain things from Russia, but also how do you really repay? And obviously, there was a long, historical legacy of working together through rupee-ruble trade. But now, since it's mainly, 70 billion trade, the exports are only about a couple of $1 billion. So obviously, you can't be paying 65 billion money to Russia just in rupees. That's not practical. That so it means, it's still not very clear openly by the government that how these transactions are taking place because of obvious reasons. But the fact of the matter is that India is buying. Indian companies are buying, both public and private companies. And they have been able to manage these transactions. And how do they do that? Whether they are paying in Indian rupees or they are paying in other BRICS currencies, whether UAE currency, Chinese currency, or other. But the mechanism has been worked it out. And this has been working for the last 3-4 years now. And I think both are satisfied the way things are happening. So that's also very interesting for the world that how do you really manage those relations? Because China and Russia, because Russia also buy a lot of stuff from China. So it's easy to sell to Chinese companies because then Russia would also buy a lot of Chinese stuff. But in India it's slightly different. But both the governments have been able to manage this. Now another thing as a result of this oil trade. which is uh, maybe I'll come back to in that point in a minute. And the second thing you asked me to speak about, uh, you know, about um, the recent summit when President Putin in December he came to India. No, this was a very successful summit, as all the earlier summits have been. So this was the 23rd India-Russia summit since 2000. It means it's very, very 25. It means only one or two summit didn't take place, during pandemic. And compared to that, even if you look at India's summits with the European Union, we signed strategic partnership in 2004 with the European Union. And the latest summit was only 16th summit. It means in between many summits did not really take place. So with Russia, this has been very, very regular. And of course, like all earlier summits, I have followed all these summits from 2000, till 25. There was one thing is that it was the kind of grand welcome which was given to President Putin. That itself was a note. It was noticed by everyone. Prime Minister himself went to airport to receive him. And there were large number of documents, about 50, 18, 19 documents were kind of, they signed, as happened in earlier summits as well. But two things which I would say which were important. One, they worked out because, there is a new momentum in the trade relationship. So how do you really keep that momentum going? One is there was very clear signal from the Russian side that they will continue to supply uninterrupted energy supply to India. And the second was that a new element was that since Indian exports are less, so how do you really kind of kind of energize or the system where India is also able to send more products to the Russian market? So they are going to start very soon the negotiations on India Eurasian Union free trade, which now the first round has already taken place, and the way India is signing all the trade agreements, 8 or 9 agreements India has signed in recent years. So there is a possibility that by next summit you might have India Eurasian Union FTA somehow the negotiations complete. And another factor is also very important about the migration and mobility. Now, there another agreement which was signed because what has happened is, there was always demand for labor force in Russia. But now in the last 3, 4 years, because a lot of industrial restructuring is taking place, a lot of defense production has gone up, and even in the agriculture sector. So as now I'm told that roughly about 100,000 Indians are now working in different parts in Russia, mainly semi-skilled and other kind of work in the industries of different kind of industries, also in the defense industry. Not really, I'm not talking about going to war or something. I mean, that's a few instances here or there, but labor mobility. And this year now yearly quota has been kind of something around 70,000 people for next year. So it means that that's again one area, and they do not have any problem. Somehow the channel is there; they are able to send the remittances back to their families, etc. So that's again a new kind of, I would say, dimension to India-Russia relation. Now, coming to again the particularly on this oil factor. Now, this is a dynamic situation because this has given a new kind of dynamism to India-Russia commercial ties, which will have implications for connectivity and other projects as well. Uh, Now, as you know, the United States had 25% extra tariffs on India because India is buying this. And as a result of Indo-US trade agreement, which now, of course, because of Supreme Court judgment, things are in a different manner. But it was mentioned by the presidential order that India has committed not to buy oil from Russia as a part of this deal. Now, this is something has become a major concern and major issue in India. Indian government has not reacted to this. What they have been saying, uh, because this question, of course, had been raised by media. This is a question raised also by the opposition parties that have you given this kind of commitment to the United States? They said no. Basically, this is a market situation. If companies are comfortable in buying, they will continue to buy it. So they will decide where to buy. But the fact of the matter is that at the moment, there is a certain decline in oil purchase from 2 million barrels plus to something around a million barrels a day. But I think the way, interestingly, the way I think the Europeans, because a large part of this oil which India has been importing, this is being actually processed by major companies in India, and then it has been re-exported back to Europe. So that was the case in the last 3 years, and Europe and also to US and to other markets as well. Now, from January this year, EU has also decided, and also the UK, that they will not buy Russian oil processed from outside. Now, how this is going to be implemented, that's one has to see in the months to come. But somehow there's a possibility that Europe may buy less, but then these companies may be looking some other markets because this is the thing they can sell it anywhere else. But this is the American angle into this. To what extent this is going to affect? But I think the way both the US and Europeans have made this such a issue, this has really become a litmus test for India's strategic autonomy. Because if they wouldn't have really said it the way they have been saying repeatedly, maybe India would have just taken the point that it's up to the companies, up to the market forces, and now if they are getting some better discount somewhere else, and then maybe they are buying this. But now this has also become a political issue. This has also become, as I said, the litmus test for India's strategic autonomy and independent foreign policy. So I think Indian companies will continue to buy. Some of them may or may not be, because if some companies feel that they have a large exposure to the US or something, they may decline in one way or the another. Because India feel that we are not violating anything because there are no UN sanctions, and even the price which have been paid. This is again even before I mean below the price which have been set by the European country EU as well. So only thing with the problem was how do you repay that? As I said, the mechanism somehow is working. So it's a bit of a dynamic situation. But my feeling is that India will continue to buy. At some point, the numbers may go down, it may go up again. So the overall situation is that India-Russia relations continue to be very, very strong. And this has, because India has clearly, the last point before I, kind of, two clear economic and strategic, I would say, interests. One, you look at the Indo-Pacific area. Now, India has certain interests in the Indo-Pacific, and as a result of this, it has forged certain kind of partnerships with the US, with Japan, with Australia, also to some extent with many of the European countries. So that will continue to be the case. But at the same time, India also has a lot of interests in the Eurasian landmass, from South Asia to Central Asia, Iran, going further, all this area. And there, India-Russia relationship is very, very crucial for us. So, and particularly, India's, difficult relations with China. And that's the reason, in fact, many observers in India are a bit uncomfortable when, Russia and China are working very, very closely. But in a one way, I think the way the geopolitics is changing, that was also reflected to some extent during the SCO summit in Tianjin, where Indian Prime Minister said that we are not competitors with China in any way, but we are both development partners. So two large countries next to each other, they can feed each other's economy, but the trust has to be built between India and China in that sense. That process is on, but so it means now the Indo-Pacific whole narrative to some extent, which dominated Indian foreign policy for the last few years, is undergoing again a different transformation. The way I think the Trump administration is, focusing on many other issues, and also India's own relations with the United States, which is somehow has facing certain difficulties in the last 1 year, which they never expected earlier. So there could be more focus also on the Eurasian area. And there, I think India, Russia, and to some extent, even later on, India, Russia, and China can work together in some of those areas. So these are the broader, I would say, few points, initial points, but I'll come back to any of the questions if you have.
Thank you so much, Professor Sachdeva, for a very comprehensive presentation of India-Russia relations. Dr. Zakharov, please.
Thank you, Ivan. Thanks for having me. And I think that it's a very good time to discuss India-Russia relations and the outcomes of the recent visit by Vladimir Putin to India, because now the dust settled down and we can probably see a bigger picture following the recent developments, both in India's foreign policy and Russia's geopolitical situation as well. So from my perspective, the outcomes of the visit are a bit ambivalent. On the face of it, it was, of course, a success, given the regularity of these summits that Professor Sachdeva referred to. And of course, a very warm reception from the Indian side. We could see high optics, red carpet reception, a large delegation from the Russian side, by the way. A lot of government officials accompanied President Putin, and it was a sign that a lot of discussions surrounding the economic cooperation has been taking place. Of course, we could see that there were attempts to discuss and strike new agreements, but the list of agreements that was published after the summit looks rather limited. To me, it seems that two deals probably stand out in this list. These concern the two joint ventures on pharmaceutical production and on fertilizer production. These are two areas of trade which are really important for both sides and which can probably rise in numbers in the years to come because they actually respond to both countries' interests. And these were the highlights, so to say. The other agreements had to do more with the people-to-people ties. Professor Sachdeva was talking about labor mobility agreement, which is important indeed. India's workforce now is playing an important role to sustain Russian economy. And of course, there were some agreements on cooperation between media. Now the Russian RT has opened its office in India, and there is a lot of expectation in Russia that now Russia will be able to disseminate its vision of the world and share it with the Indian audience. On the flip side, it's really difficult to pick out any significant deal that was struck. Despite different negotiations and different expectations, primarily in the defense sphere, there was no finalization or announcement of any big ticket item. Of course, the question or the issue of Russian oil supplies has taken center stage over the past several months. On the one hand, it was pretty clear even before the December summit that the oil shipments from Russia have reached its peak, and there was simultaneously some sort of a ceiling for bilateral trade as well, because these record numbers in trade, they were really, 80% of it had to do with the spike in oil supplies. So it was pretty clear, and I think it was a major item on the agenda of the bilateral talks on how to sustain this momentum in bilateral trade if India has to reduce its procurement of Russian oil. But what happened next, this announcement by President Trump and uncertainty over the substance, over the content of India-US trade deal, I think that added some sort of nervousnesses for Moscow. And I think it's the first time over the past 4 years when we could see some kind of anxiety from the Russian side on the future trajectory of oil supplies. It has not been the case after the previous restrictions, whether we recall the price cap or the Biden administration sanctions against the Russian tanker fleet. So the major and painful sanctions against two Russian oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, coupled with some uncertain commitments by New Delhi to reduce the purchase of Russian oil. But in general, I agree with Professor Sachdeva. I wouldn't expect a complete cessation of India's imports of Russian oil. I think that, firstly, the Indian government was quick to emphasize and prioritize the need to, prioritize national interest as the guiding factor for energy procurements. And I think this sounds reassuring to Moscow. It's also important to take into account, and I think that Professor Sachdeva referred to that in his remarks, that these oil supplies, they have created the whole ecosystem of Russia-India financial connectivity. Because we could see a working mechanism of transactions in national currencies. We could see a rise in interbank cooperation between the two countries. And actually, the rise in numbers of Russian banks operating on Indian soil does not give us a hint that the economic cooperation is about to go down. And importantly, I think that if we remove oil from the economic equation, this would leave economic ties in a very uncertain state. Because if we think about the trade numbers, without oil, they would return to a negligible $10 to $15 billion. And this will probably be a major concern for the economic cooperation between the two countries. So I think that all these factors are taken into account by India. And I guess that importantly, over the past years, this oil connection has not been just transactional. It has not been just about attractive prices and discounts from the Russian side. So I think that it's also part of the strategic choices that India has been making. And of course, an important argument that you can often hear from the Russian side is that these supplies in some ways help stabilize the global energy markets. So in some ways, Western countries, and again, European countries probably can be interested in these oil supplies going forward. From my observation, and along with finding the way out of this situation, probably finding new mechanisms and loopholes in the sanctions regime, of course, both sides will prioritize the diversification of their economic ties. We could see one of the outcomes of the summit was the adoption of the bilateral economic cooperation program. I think this entails attempts at providing a greater access for the Indian companies to the Russian market, attempts to remove the existing barriers for trade flows, and of course, streamline investments, because the investment cooperation, some joint ventures are now taking an important place within bilateral agenda. So I would expect this economic cooperation keeping momentum for the foreseeable future. And of course, defense cooperation is really important. It's an important pillar of bilateral ties. But for the moment, I will keep it aside and probably I can address it during the Q&A.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Zakharov. I'll ask you now 2 or 3 questions, both of you, and then I'll prompt our participants. If they have questions, please type them in the question and answer box, and then I'll be very happy to ask them to our prominent panelists. So there are so many questions one can ask about this topic, but let me start with one very general question and one very specific one. So the general one is, where do you think the SCO fits in the relationship? Because obviously SCO is a very interesting platform. India joined it much later, to a great extent, because of Russian efforts. Initially, China was a little bit reluctant, but then eventually both India and Pakistan joined. So, what's the role of SCO in this correlation, especially as Professor Sachdeva mentioned, there is Indian interest in Central Asia and Eurasia more generally. And my second question is a little bit more specific. I know that increasingly Russian defense products feature Chinese technology. And I have heard complaints from Indian defense experts, former military, who claim this is imposing restrictions on the potential for arm imports from Russia for India. So, to what an extent do you think this is a problem, and could it become more of a constraining factor in the future? Please, who would like to take the questions first? Professor Sachdeva,
Okay.
please.
Uh, well, I think in this broader scheme of things, the way I think the India-Russia relations have developed and continue to develop, um, SEO, I think, is going to play more and more important role along with BRICS, of course. You know, it's very interesting. You're right. You know, in the beginning, India wasn't quite sure what kind of role it has within SEO. And that's why for many years, actually, India was just an observer. And India was happy to be an observer within SEO. So, it was thought that this is as the name itself was, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization somehow broadly Chinese kind of a dominated grouping. So, but interesting thing was that this is the only grouping where both South Asians and Central Asians meet, because there are a lot of groupings of Central Asians. There is South Asia, but at one place where both of them meet is only SCO. And I think when India decided to join SCO, the things were changing in a sense. It was in 2014, by that was decided that the Americans will move out from Afghanistan. So it was perhaps thought that maybe SCO will try to do something within Afghanistan. It might have a bigger role later on. Similarly, in 2015, Prime Minister Modi, he visited all five Central Asian countries together. And earlier we had this Connect Central Asia policy. So there was a lot of enthusiasm to do something in Central Asia. And a lot of uncertainty. And that was also the time when I think Iran was also coming out of sanctions at once before it came back again. So,
Mhm.
a lot of new openings were happening at that point of time, and there was a bit of uncertainty about Afghanistan situation. So then it was decided that it's good for India to be part of SCO, because SCO could be a useful platform later on. Now, things, of course, have changed very, very differently. But still, as we have seen in the last SEO summit in Tianjin, the Prime Minister decided, because some of the meetings India did not go even after becoming member. It was sent by Foreign Minister level or some other level. But this time, Prime Minister went there, and that itself, even just the photo of three leaders, Chinese, Indian, and Russian leaders, that itself was flashed all across the world. That
Mhm.
itself became a point of discussion. So I think SEO slowly and slowly would become more useful. That also would depend how India's relations develop some kind of towards normalcy with China. So I think this is what perhaps I would see, that more positive thinking about SEO in the years to come. And I would say, in fact, India is looking more positively towards SEO than what it was, because earlier it wasn't very sure what kind of thing. Then it was just there, but now maybe in the changing geopolitics, as the BRICS role itself has also increased, and now this year the country has presidency of BRICS. So within that also, all these things are just kind of reinforce each other. BRICS will reinforce SCO will reinforce to some extent because some of the players are common and some of the issues are common there. And what was the second thing you asked about? Sorry, I forget.
Chinese components
Chinese, yeah.
in the Russian arms exports to India, and what effect this might have on on the future of the defense relationship. Both the present defense relationship and the future.
Yeah, I mean, this is an issue. One, of course, is that at the very broad level, many analysts in India, of course, are worried of very close ties between Russia and China at this point of time. This is also understandable to some extent because, and I think even Russians themselves are worried to some extent, the kind of influence they have now from China. But the problem is, in this kind of geopolitical situation, when you have sanctions, when you're cornered, then there is very little choice actually for Russia not to have those kind of close relations with them. And this is also a major market for your energy products, and also you get all kind of technology and other things from China. Now, so that worry has been there. But then if that is also extended to, as you mentioned about the defense production, that many people would saying that many of the products which will come from China or from Russia, they might have Chinese technologies, and that might create problems in the long run. This is the one kind of I would say argument some people have been making for quite some time. But despite all these, I would say, worries, what is again quite interesting that India continues to buy. So that's why, in fact, the focus perhaps is going to be more and more of a very different nature of defense partnership between India and Russia. It's going to be more, to large extent, produced in India. So that will also help strengthening India's its own make in India kind of defense production. And of course, this worry is there. I wouldn't discount this, but I think India has been able to manage this in the past as well. So you are careful what kind of partnership you have, what kind of weapon system you are going to buy, what kind of weapon system you are going to develop together. So once you are assured that this is broadly technologies which are developed in Russia, or this is also we can develop within India, something we can add up certain things. So the worry is there, but I don't think that's really going to decide uh, everything about defense production or defense partnership between India and Russia. And that's why, in fact, the next, I would say, if there is any possibility of, further buying, fighter jets, the fifth generation fighter jets from Russia, Sukhoi 57. I think a large part of that, India would like to produce it within India itself. So this is what I think they are going to do. So this worry is there, but I think India and Russia, they have enough mechanism, they have enough kind of discussions among them at very different levels. They'll be able to control some of those things, which the worries are kind of taken care of. It's there, but it can be managed, I believe.
Thank you, Alexei. I'm sorry, Dr. Zakharov, please.
So, with regard to SCO, I think SCO is a sign of regional cooperation between India and Russia. As you rightly mentioned, China was hesitant to accept India's joining the SCO and was lobbying for Pakistan. But at some point, they managed to strike a consensus with Russia on taking both countries on board as full members of the organization. At the same time, personally, I have a few reservations about the SCO trajectory as an organization. I think that the expansion of geography and new members and new partner states, I think it makes it a bit difficult to come up with common approaches because there are some different visions by the member states of the SCO. At the same time, we could see more push from the Russian side to make SCO deal with different economic issues as well. And one of the follow-ups from the Tianjin summit is the discussion of the creation of the SCO Development Bank, an initiative that Russia was wary of in 2010s, in the last decade. But now I think the economic situation makes Russia rethink and reconsider its approaches and being more, I mean, being ready to accommodate the Chinese approaches on this matter. I don't think that this is shared by the Indian side. I think that India has been more cautious regarding the economic initiatives that could probably highlight Chinese leadership or provide more leverage to China as an economic behemoth within the SCO. But at the same time, I think it's now part of the agenda. Of course, regional security issues are a major part of SCO agenda. And here I agree with Professor Sachdeva. Issues like Afghanistan, I think it's one of the instances where SCO has been useful as a platform as a meeting point for national security representatives to discuss the developing situations in the region, especially the situation in and over Afghanistan. But otherwise, I mean, there are some concerns regarding the efficiency of SEO, especially given that it tries to expand both the agenda and the geography it covers. Regarding the second question, I think, to be fair, it's not only Chinese components that are there in the Russian defense equipments, but somehow, despite all the sanctions and restrictions, Russia has been able to source Western components as well. And I think this particular issue has been highlighted many times by Ukraine. And I mean, it shows us that Russia has been capable to go ahead with defense production and overcome the limitations and technical difficulties that it faced in the initial stages of war. On the other side, I think if we take Russia-India cooperation, there is no other way than moving on to the co-production and more localization of production on Indian soil. And I think that the recent offers from the Russian side, whether we take Su-57 or the potential, probably it will take many years to come, but potential deal on S-500 systems. This offer includes a serious technology transfer and production of these systems on Indian soil. And I think in this future scenario, when these deals probably will go through or not, there are many factors that influence defense cooperation as of now. Probably if these platforms are produced on the Indian soil, it will be easier for the Indian companies to choose the contractors and the suppliers of the components under the Russian license to avoid any dependency or any vulnerability to China.
Well, thank you. Now, let me turn to the questions that our participants have submitted. One question comes from my ISIS colleague, Dr. Sandeep Bardwaj. And his question is about Lord Professor Sachdeva, and it's about trust. Essentially, what are the factors which make up the basis of this trust between India and Russia? Has Russia earned this trust? That's his question. And what can break this trust? What do you think?
Well, I think there's been a long history where the trust has been built. As I said, from the Soviet periods, from 1971 till whenever there was an issue of Kashmir at the UNSC, Russia supported India. And more importantly, whenever there was any crisis whatever the kind of support which was required at that particular point of time, India was able to receive that support. And I think that is also shown the way India has somehow responded to the Ukrainian issue in the last few years. So the kind of trust which has been built over decades between the policymakers, between the military officials, and at various branches of the different governments, that's a testimony of the kind of relationship what we have today. And despite all the difficulties in maintaining this relationship, still they have been able to really maintain and really continue to have very strong relationship. And that's what a bit of a mystery also sometime to others as well. But in fact, as Alexei was saying, there are certain I would say, issues or and anxieties, perhaps you can see even from the Russian side for two, three issues. One is, the issue of oil purchase have been raised by Europeans for, Americans in fact initially were very supportive of this because they thought it will be useful for maintaining stability within the energy market. And India was very hopeful that the new Trump administration will not create any problem. In fact, they were very hopeful that if the Ukraine crisis had been resolved the way he was trying, this can really solve problem for India and Russia because if Americans also start doing work, working normally with Russia, that becomes very easy for us to also manage. That so far hasn't really happened. So the Europeans were quite disappointed actually with India in the beginning because they thought as a very close strategic partners, for EU and all of the partners, India would be kind of condemning Russia and India will be doing. That didn't happen. So after some time, they kind of realized that, they can't really push India on this line. So that, the other interests, so you start working on those issues. Now, an anxiety at this point of time, I'm sure with the Russian side is to what extent now India would be able to manage the kind of pressure you have now from the United States, not to buy. Uh, and particularly when India also was negotiating the trade deal with the US itself, and because the US is a very important market also for Indian exports. So this is what India has to really now show that they will be able to manage this. And the second worry to me, which hasn't really been, I would say, thought very carefully by many, but it can become a factor. When we had the India-EU trade deal recently, that's okay. I mean, India worked, with the trade with the European Union. So Europe, I mean, I don't think Russia will have any major issue with that because even if they have, that's not really major concern for India. But we also have now a defense and security partnership with the European Union. Now, for the European countries, Russia is a major strategic threat or major strategic challenge. They wanted from the very beginning the strategic defeat of Russia, which of course India doesn't share because within the kind of multipolar world India would like to see, India feels that a strong Russia is really very useful for the whole world system and also for us. Now, the way the tension between transatlantic partnership now, Europeans are in the years to come are going to strengthen their defenses. The huge amount of money is going to be spent within Europe to build up their, capacities in the defense sector. They have technologies, they have resources. Once they decide, they would be able to do it quite significantly. But still, they haven't done for so long. And India also has a certain other kind of defense capacities, which they would like to actually work with India. And, certain kind of part of their supply chains, India could also become that. So if that happens, which also is part of India's ambition to become part of, that supply chain of defense industries within Europe, that can create in the long run certain kind of issues between India and Russia because you're also building your defense industry with the Russian know-how, with the Russian capabilities, with Russian. So Russians have been quite, as I said, the trust has been there. So they have been able to not fully transfer, but at least to a large extent, we have been able to work together on many of those issues. So how India is going to navigate that? If you want to also be part of the European supply chain defense production, at the same time, you also want to be very key component of your defense production is actually Russian partnership. So that India really has to manage, and I think there could be an anxiety in Russia. How do you really, India is going to do that? So India has to assure Russians about this. But as I think Alexei has also mentioned, what has really happened as a result of this last 2, 3 years of changes. A new ecosystem, as he said, the financial connectivity, which I really liked the way term he used. Now that has been built despite all the challenges. Now, that can really help large number of small and medium industries to take advantage from the Russian market because maybe they were not able to compete earlier because all kind of products were coming to Russia. Now you have a limited competition, and Russians want to encourage perhaps Indian exports into the market. And those companies are not really so big that they're worried about the Europeans or American kind of markets that they are exposed there. So if they find good outlet in the Russian market, like during the Soviet period, many of those companies were just producing for the Soviet Union. The moment the system collapsed, those companies also collapsed. So you can really build up large number of companies for the Russian market, those who are not worried about the Western market. So that can, and once you have the ecosystem of financial connectivity, they are able to manage their trade. That can really give a kind of long-term, strong, I would say, base to India-Russia relations. And uh, at certain numbers, India will continue to buy because India is not going to, I mean, as happened perhaps earlier in the case of Iran when India just stopped it. But Iranian oil was not, it didn't become such a big issue in the Indian, I would say, discussions, in the policy discussion. India just, kind of stop this and then, just start buying from somewhere else. But now this has become such a big issue that it will be not very easy for India to just say, okay, we will not buy the Russian oil. Then it means what we are talking about, strategic autonomy, independence of foreign policy, etc. So that's a major kind of challenge. So that will continue. And anyway, India would not like to actually do that. So the numbers will go up and down depending on the circumstances. And as we said, these are not just transactional because some people just make it like this that, because they were getting $4, kind of discount, if the $2 discount now it will not work or something. I think it's much bigger than that, it's much deeper than that. So that system connectivities which are being built, that perhaps will, sustain much longer. In fact, at one point of time, there was also discussions that if India is actually, as a result of that, Indian exports have also gone up. Because if you look at Indian exports today, a very important component of that is really petroleum products. So if India stop buying from here, that all the system, I mean, the capacity of petroleum processing what India has created, that perhaps would be, not utilized efficiently. So you have that system now that has become a very important exporter of this. So India would like to continue buy more and more, I would say, those products, and that will continue to be a solid base for many of other, major projects of connectivity and others. So there is a dynamism, but there is also strong pressure at the moment. Things may change, but at the moment, so far India has and Russia they have managed well. But let's see how things move further.
Thank you, Alexei. Would you like to add something on the issue of trust? And by the way, a small follow-up. I have heard claims that the issue of trust is very much generational in Russia-India relations. That is kind of, generally speaking, older people who kind of sometimes remember the Soviet times tend to feel a much stronger bond between the two countries. And I have heard claims that younger generations don't share such a strong bond. So, well, what do you think? Is there any truth in this? Is it exaggerated? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that we have such thing as a generational gap, and I think that the generation that remembers the Cold War times and the close friendship between the Soviet Union and India, and they remember not only political connections or geopolitical affinity between the two countries, they also remember cultural bonds that existed there, a lot of programs in education that existed there in the Soviet Union. So I think that still somehow plays an important role in the relationship, but there is a big question mark, what comes next when the new generations will come to power and they will become decision makers from both sides. I think that there will be more pragmatism in the relationship rather than this sentimentality and emotional connection between the two countries. Regarding the trust erosion, I would probably highlight a few geopolitical concerns. I absolutely agree with Professor Sachdeva regarding Russian concerns about the trajectory of India-EU relationship, especially potential ties-ups in defense between the Indian and European manufacturers. I think it's a point of major concern for Russia. But beyond that, Russia used to have many difficulties with India's participation in Quad, but at the moment it's a little bit complicated and unclear. And I think that these concerns have been mitigated recently. At least we haven't heard many critical statements from the Russian side. But of course, the state of affairs between India and the United States has always attracted a lot of attention from Moscow. From the Indian point of view, I think that there could be concerns regarding the alignment between Russia and China. It's still not an alliance, of course. There are several limiting factors. But if we take a look at their partnership in the Indo-Pacific, for instance, we could see a rising number of joint maneuvers, exercises, naval and aerial patrols in different zones of the Indo-Pacific. At the moment, this is more about signaling to the United States and its regional allies, because many of these maneuvers take place in the territorial waters or airspace near South Korea or Japan, or in different zones of the Pacific Ocean. So if, like, strictly speaking, it does not directly affect Indian national interests. But if we imagine that this coordination and this alignment would shift to other zones of the Indo-Pacific, and we could see more coordination between Russia and China in the Indian Ocean or in South Asia, in the Indian immediate neighborhood, for example, of course, it will raise alarms in New Delhi. At the moment, I think that when it comes to Russia's approach to South Asia, Moscow tries to prioritize India as a major partner and take into account Indian concerns regarding its policies and regarding its cooperation with regional partners. It's also the case with Pakistan, where we can see some limitations to their engagement, and Russia limiting itself in going ahead with defense cooperation, even though, of course, since Russia is being more active in South Asia recently, and I think there has been some growth of political contacts between Russia and Pakistan as well. So there can be some future points of concern and some factors that will affect trust, or let's say test this durability of political connections. But for the moment, I think these concerns have been more or less manageable.
Thank you. We have a question from Daria Maheshwari from Sputnik, India. So her question is, reporting Indian media indicated that India is increasingly pivoting toward Russian Su-54 FGFA among other candidates, including F-35. In purely military and strategic terms, how do our experts view this proclivity toward the Russian Su-57 jet? Who would like to take this question? Alexei or Professor Serdeva? Well, Alexei, please.
Yeah, I can provide my view of that. So first, regarding the wording of this question, I mean, we could hear the assessments in Delhi that this deal could help Indian Air Force to address the issue of aircraft shortage, and indeed come as a stopgap measure. At the same time, we have to understand that if signed or if reached, this deal would have been more than a stopgap measure. It would have strategic implications and would be a real sign of India going ahead with the defense procurements from the Russian manufacturing companies, despite the existing hurdles, despite the sanctions. Even the sanctions introduced much before the war in Ukraine, like CATSA legislation that was limiting the significant transactions with Russian defense sector. So it would be much more than just a stopgap measure. There is a lot of talk in Delhi regarding the potential, implications of this deal and whether the Su-57 is a good option for India to go forward with. Actually, there are several concerns regarding, the technical component of the Su-57. Some defense experts point to its low stealth capability. They also say that what Russia offers is a new engine which has to be tested and has to be proved during several years, so you cannot rely on it. The other experts point to the general reliability of Russian engines in different aircraft that India procured before. So there are many contradictory takes on that. And I think at the end of the day, it's the Indian government who will take this decision. So Russian offer is on the table. We could see that Russia is ready to produce this aircraft on Indian soil. Russia has started to supply these fighter jets to Algeria. The contract was signed in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. And now the first few aircraft have been supplied to Algeria already. But of course, there are lots of concerns regarding the current geopolitical situations, talks with the United States, sanctions issue, and the general reliability of Russian aircraft. So there are many factors to be taken into account, and I think this will be factored in before the final decision from the Indian side.
Professor Sachdeva, would you like to add something?
Well, I think, I'm not really a defense expert, but, and I see all these reports, what he's mentioning. Um, and I obviously, don't take every report, in a sense, because, these reports are written, as you know, when the big defense, I would say, contracts are being discussed. But one thing is is certain that it's being considered seriously. That's why these reports are there. Now, ultimately, as he said, the government would decide on the basis of the price factor, on the basis of certain technology factor, and already whether they are tested or not tested, but already more than 200 planes are with jet with the Indian military. Air Force, they have been using it. They know what exactly the strengths are of Russian jets are. And they would be able to evaluate what it and how it can be certain things can be added into this. So I think all those factors will come in, but I don't think the India would be so much concerned whether it'll, the payment issue or the issue of whether somebody else would like it or not like it. I think that those are not the issues which are going to be really determining factor here. Whether Americans or European like it or not like it, something if they find this is a good deal, this is what you need, I think they will go ahead with this. Other factors they can easily manage that. But at this point of time, as I understand, it's being considered very, very seriously. And the one another thing, in fact, in the beginning, what you mentioned during the summit meeting, that there was no major defense deal was kind of mentioned or it was announced. But if you just look at all the summit meetings which took place in the past, most of the defense procurements were never really kind of announced during the summit meetings. There is a separate channel. Those channels, those things keep happening all across the year. And as and when things are matured, they are announced there. They are the, because it's a long process anyway, it happens. So during the summit meetings, normally, the build up to the summit, sometime you'll have many stories that this particular deal or something. But normally I've seen that, major defense deals between India and Russia are not really during the summit one. But in the due process, in the due course of time, those things happen. So this perhaps also would be the case with whatever the new deals are being discussed between India and Russia at this point.
Sure. Thank you. So I have another very bright question from my colleague, Dr. Sandeep Bardwaj. Russia is in a unique position as a major power that enjoys good relationships with both China and India. Has it ever tried to mediate in Sino-Indian normalization in the last 5 years or before that? Is it in Moscow's interest to have Beijing and New Delhi as friends or as rivals? And here I want to add that as a kind of China specialist, I know that Russia did try to mediate between India and China back in 2020 and have been kind of Well, different reports how well this went. So, what do you think? To what an extent Russia can mediate between China and India, and how successful or unsuccessful its previous attempts have been?
Well, I think India would definitely, I mean, Russia definitely would like, good relations between India and China.
Uh, well, regrettably, such things sometimes happen when you have a live program. Alexei, would you like to kind of join us
I
on
can
this
take it
question?
forward. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
So if we look at Russia's conceptual documents, at Russian foreign policy concept, or at the recently floated concept on world majority, we will see that conceptually, I mean, the good relationship between China and India is often mentioned as an important pillar of Russian vision for the world, and specifically for Eurasia as a broader region. That's why Russia bets a lot on some kind of harmony in between China and India as partners, and at the same time, in the idea of trilateral cooperation and the idea of Russia, India, China trilateral. That is also a large part of Russian foreign policy vision. For this reason, Russia has been trying both to mediate and to offer its good offices whenever any difficult situation happens in India-China relationship. At the same time, if we remember 2020, probably it was a coincidence that both SCO summits, I mean, SCO meetings happened in Moscow, and defense ministers and foreign ministers could meet and discuss the issues in the bilateral relationship. So Russia was offering to mediate, and Russia is doing so even when India probably doesn't feel so much comfortable that Russia tries to step in. But at the same time, I mean, for Russia, it's really important that both countries were on good terms between each other.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, Professor
Yeah,
Sergey,
no,
the
in fact, I mean, I think
connection broke
he's
briefly.
right. I mean, obviously, Russia would be very happy if there are, very good relationship between India and China, and then many of the projects within SCO, within BRICS could be easily kind of, done, and kind of integration between different kind of connectivity projects and many other things would become much more easier. But from the Indian point of view, India, obviously, from the very beginning, does not like any third party mediation. Our discussions with whether it was Pakistan or between India and China or with any other country, because India feels that both India and China, mature countries, they can manage their affairs, and there are lines of communication between them. This has been the case even now, as things were pretty bad, but still they have been able to manage, restore certain kind of normalcy between India and China. Now, the airlines have started operating step by step, things are moving. And we have seen what happened during the India-Pakistan recent conflict when President Trump start claiming, maybe he has done it hundreds of times now, that he was able to resolve this. Even once India has not acknowledged his role in doing that. He might have played some role somewhere, I mean, the US administration. So the similar thing between India and China, there are difficulties. And at one point of time, things, officially were really at a low. Friends like Russia might have played some role somewhere to bring certain things in certain normalcy. Behind the scenes, certain things can always be done. Americans can do it, China can do it, Russia can do it, India can do it for others as well. Like India has also been asked about, doing something in Ukraine with, Prime Minister has also met President Zelensky, and, so those things, okay, but, ultimately, this is India and China, they have to, resolve their own differences whenever they feel they're comfortable, whenever they feel that both are satisfied on certain, and that movement is already on. Slowly and slowly, things are going in the positive direction, and the global geopolitics, and I think the way uh, there has been certain damage to the Indo-US relation in the last 1 year. That is also giving a very different kind of, uh, you know, I would say, turn to the way India looks at a relationship with China. Because, to some extent, I think when Prime Minister went to Tianjin for SCO summit, that itself was a kind of a geopolitical response to the way the United States was trying to treat India in one way, making different kind of statements. So India would be able to manage in its own way. But of course, I think at any point, if Russia could have played some role, it's okay. But Russians know pretty well, even if they did play some role somewhere, they are never going to say things the way it's being said, say, in the United States. So that's the kind of, I think, the maturity you have between India and Russia and the kind of relationship which has been built over decades. That's what I think will continue. But of course, from the Russian point of view, and overall, I would say in the Eurasian, what are the new security and economic architecture, which is because Asia is going to be very, very important for India as well. Because if you look at today, yes, it's important for India, United States, it's important to Europe, but if the trade numbers are quite important, but as a percentage of the total Indian trade, actually the value of US and Europe is actually declining for India. So more than 50% of India trade actually happens with Asia, all parts of Asia, and China is an important part, and then others as well. So India would like, as I said, to have stable, and the stability of this region is also very important for India as well. But at this point of time, things are pretty difficult for India also to manage because two of your friends, I mean, in a sense, Russia is under sanctions. You try to do certain thing with Iran. Iran is under sanction. All kind of tensions are being built there. Then India is also today, of course, the Prime Minister is visiting Israel. That's important in a different context for certain kind of technology, certain kind of defense product. So India is this multi-engagement in a sense, very strategic multi-engagement is trying to. So far, it has been reasonably successful, and it will continue to do that. And in the long run, if somehow friends are able to facilitate certain good things, it's always useful in a very mature manner. I think things can be done.
Thank you.
But officially, I think it'll never acknowledge those things. Yeah.
Yes, very often states do these type of things behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Very soon I'll be gathering the last round of questions. So if you want to ask our eminent panelists any questions, please time them in the next three or 4 minutes. Before this, I would like to ask a question about the European Union. As a European myself, to what an extent, obviously, EU-India relations have gotten a very major momentum in the last couple of months, especially with the free trade agreement. And initially, many people believed that India's relationship with Russia and its stance on the war in Ukraine would be a major obstacle. My sense is that it hasn't been. Does the Ukrainian issue and India's relationship with Russia feature as a major kind of question in EU-India relations, or is this kind of passé? Professor Sachdeva, and then I'll turn to Alexei.
Yeah, I mean, one is that India has clearly identified Europe in its ambition to become what the government says the Viksit Bharat developed economy by 2047 as an important partner for trade, technology, investment, green transition. So they know that there are certain investment can be sourced from Europe, technology, and so that's important. Now, to what extent Russia is a factor? As I said earlier, I mean, initially they were quite disappointed why India is not doing, they thought India would be just doing, what the Europeans would think India would be doing. But that has a bit of after a few months, of course, even if when they come, they all the time, the first thing to talk about Russia's war on Ukraine, etc., etc. But India has, have been listening to them, but beyond that, they also understand that they can't push India, particularly the India-Russia relations, because that's something clearly understood by them. But of course, different leaders will keep saying things, like when they released the new India strategy a couple of months back before, I mean, last year in November or September sometime, when the EU foreign policy chief, Kaya Kallas, when she was actually uh, releasing this India strategy paper. Somehow, as you know, as she's quite hawkish on coming from Baltics and the hawkish on Russia, and she knows, of course, India's relations with Russia. And then there were questions were asked, and then she said, we can't have a trade agreement with Russia so long as they continue to buy oil from Russia, etc. Something of that nature, which obviously was not really seen very positively in India. That you can't dictate things to us. I mean, we have certain definite interests between India and the European Union. Uh, so we are working on this, and we very much like to have this trade agreement. But there's no point linking this to what India is doing with Russia or not. Um, but later on, we realized that, of course, but overall within the European Union, they have understood, and then we had this final, trade agreement, things are finalized. So yes, I mean, they have understood India's relations with Russia, and it's not really a major factor, I would say. To some extent, they would think to what extent India would be really a major strategic kind of partner to us when they're the major strategic challenge, Russia, they have very close ties with them. So far, those issues have not really, I would say, affected your economic issues, trade, technology, etc. But when it comes to, as I was saying, when it comes to more strategic and defense issues, that might, because those are just the very beginning of that. Now, one India only hopes that the very in the very near future you will have some kind of settlement in Ukraine and things have become normal. Then it will be easier for India to manage. Otherwise, those are the issues might affect some of those strategic and defense and other issues between India and the European Union. Otherwise, on other issues, I think they know that the interests are too much. I would say there's convergence of interest on many many issues, uh, and now they are also looking for more partners because of the transatlantic tensions and the issues. So for them, they really, and that was also perhaps to some extent some factor behind India EU trade deal as well. Uh, Not that it happened just because of that, because they have been working on this for, even the deadline was set even much before that when the Ursula von der Leyen was here. And they said by the end of this year, end of last year, I mean, they would be able to finalize this deal. But yes, immediate certain things did um, kind of facilitate some of those agreements. But I think they have understood that they can't push India as far as the Russian issue is concerned. India has managed that thing pretty well. India has been able to explain to them. They have been keep saying in rhetoric, but beyond that, I think it hasn't really affected that much so far.
Alexei, would you like to add something? What are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I will just add a few points because I'm taking a rather cursory look at the India-EU relationship. From my observation, there has been indeed an attempt to delink the progress in the relationship from India-Russia relations and from the situation in the Ukraine. If we look at the recent summit, India-EU summit, we can see that the progress is possible despite the fact that probably some reservations about the level of connections between India and Russia. So, I mean, these reservations are remaining in place and they will remain in place for the foreseeable future. But at the same time, this doesn't prevent India and the European Union from progress in their relationship and from concrete agreements, whether in trade or defense and security. At the same time, we have to understand that I think India has been perfectly balancing in between different actors over the past 4 years. And on Ukraine, and the issue of Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, has been all the time highlighted by Prime Minister Modi during his meetings with Vladimir Putin. And the December summit was no exception. But at the same time, this was done in a diplomatic manner, in a friendly manner, so that India's concerns regarding the war and regarding the need to stop hostilities somehow aligns with the European concerns as well. But at the same time, there is sufficient gap, there is sufficient room for maneuver and sufficient room to maintain relations with both Brussels and Moscow. So I think this responds to India's interest to go ahead with both relationships at the same time.
Thank you. Now, my last question, because we have just 4 or 5 minutes left. There has been a big rush for connectivity in recent years with the BRI, EU's gateway, and so on. How much potential do you think there is for partnership between India and Russia on connectivity? People were speaking about North Sea rule, but obviously this is dependent on situation in Iran. There is a corridor between Vladivostok and I think Mumbai, and obviously there is some talk about what is called the North route or North Sea passage. So, do you think there is any potential for connectivity partnership between the two sides? Alexei, please.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I think that connectivity has gained momentum. At least discussions on connectivity and some efforts to improve connectivity between the two sides are now part and parcel of larger efforts to improve economic cooperation. So Vladivostok-Chennai corridor, for instance, is now operational. It has been operational actually for quite some time, though for some reasons it was announced only in 2023, 2024, that the shipments between the two cities, between the two ports are taking place. Although I think that, of course, the number of these shipments and the volumes of cargo could be increased if there would be more trade between the two countries in general. And probably there will be a better connectivity on the Russian side, I mean, within the Russian territory, because the Vladivostok port is just part of the Russian Far East, and it's also necessary to improve connectivity between the Russian Far East and the European part of the country, which is somehow still the center of economic gravity for Russia. When it comes to INSTC, I think that this corridor has also seen a growing momentum, but of course it's fallen victim to a lot of geopolitical uncertainty. Even if we leave aside uncertainty surrounding Iran and potential US operation and different protests and unstable domestic situation in Iran, we would see that there are so many participating countries in this project that some of these routes are passing, the South Caucasus and other branches bypassing Central Asian countries. And for instance, any instability in Russia's relationship with Azerbaijan, for instance, it can also affect the functioning of some of the branches of this corridor. When we go down to the level of business and economic feasibility of this corridor, then again, there can be some questions regarding the freight cost, for instance, which is often higher than maritime connectivity that is there between, for instance, Mumbai and Russian southern or northern ports. So there are also issues regarding the timing of deliveries, regarding the so-called smoothless connectivity, because in some sections the shipments require, transshipment from one railway gauge to another. So there is a variety of technical issues that still exist there. The corridor requires more investment. Russia seems willing to invest in the Iranian economy, but the instability around Iran prevents these investments from coming through. That's why it remains to be seen how this project will be developed in the near future. And finally, when it comes to NSR, Northern Sea Route, it's part of the discussions, but I think that it's more about negotiations now than about operationalization of any cooperation in this region.
Thank you. Professor Sachdeva, would you have something to add very, very briefly, because we are running out of time, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Well, very briefly, we can have the full webinar on connectivity once, but
absolutely. And we'll have it.
Well, the one thing, it's quite, I think, certain that for the next 10 years, 15 years, this phase of globalization discussions are going to be dominated by connectivity and all these connectivity projects, what we have discussed, and many others. Because every important country in this whole Eurasian region have their own connectivity strategy, either individually or jointly with others. And all these, but the point is that there are two major dimensions to any connectivity project. One is there are clear-cut geopolitical dimensions of that particular project or initiative, and then there are serious developmental issues, and economic viability, etc., of those projects. And it's very difficult to isolate both of them. At some point of time, the geopolitics of any particular connectivity may dominate discussions, or somebody would like to just focus too much on geopolitics rather than actually the other one. Like in India, I find there is too much focus on the geopolitical dimension of the BRI, because Chinese BRI, because of China-Pakistan economic corridor and certain ports which are being built around India. So sometimes we ignore the whole developmental aspect of that. And then of course the geopolitics will keep changing. Even INSTC, the routes may change because initially India wanted to link that thing with Europe, and for all these discussions in India for the last many years, INSTC has been part of any kind of a connectivity strategy if India had. So it will keep changing. Now, in the last 2-3 years, we are also seeing, since 23, the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridors. So a lot of, but connectivity things are always, I find it's a bit of a positive. How there you can connect things. Apart from the geopolitical dimension where you want to negate certain connectivity project. But in the end, whatever the geopolitics of any project is, these projects, narratives will continue, discussion will continue. These are long-term projects. It takes time. But by and large, they do provide certain positive connotations to the relationship. And when you talk about that, you can link many things, you can have many more opportunities. And like earlier, as I said, we want to link with Europe now because Europe doesn't want to link with Russia. So others are giving, Armenians are coming up with their own design, something else. They said, you can use this one rather than going via Russia. So all those things will keep changing. But in the end, the trade volumes and economic viability of these projects is going to really decide which project is going to be. And some of those projects may look really competitive to each other, but they may ultimately just complement each other, many of those the long run. So this overall connectivity thing has been there within the India-Russia narrative, and I think it will continue to give a certain positive spin to our relationship. Whether those things will actually materialize or not, but this has been a positive factor within the India-Russia relationship.
Thank you. Well, it's a very fascinating panel, but regrettably we are running out of time. So let me thank both Professor Sachdeva and Dr. Zakharov. It was really a great, you both made great presentation, and then we had a very good discussion and Q&A afterwards. Thank you so much for speaking on our panel, and thanks so much for all the participants and for the organizing team, especially Jordan Ang kind of helped organize this. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you at Resina, both of you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
I'm looking forward to our meeting.
It was a real pleasure, and we should definitely organize another thing in the future.
Yeah, with pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.